Hi there. My name is Scott Larson. I am the writer and artist of the comic book series Visitations. Visitations is the history of Chicago as seen through the eyes of the residents of the city's oldest cemetery. And I've been doing videos for the past couple weeks, kind of helping people learn how to do different things that are comic or comic book convention related. And the interview I've got today is with a cosplayer named Jen Eyre, and so the way I actually met Jen, or actually I didn't really meet her until I talked to her just before this started, was I was at Star Wars Celebration in 2019 in Chicago, and I was with a couple people, and this girl walked up to the little boy I was with, and she was dressed in a poor Cruella de Vil type outfit, and she handed him a business card, and she made some kind of comment about if he liked her coat or not, and I thought that the costume was really neat, and so I grabbed the card away from him, and I started following her on Instagram and on Facebook. And the thing that I really like about Jen is she's been doing all kinds of different things. She makes costumes. She's a member of Rebel Legion and the 501st for Star Wars cosplay groups that are, you know, they're hooked up into Lucasfilm, and she's always doing something. She's always got live videos going on. She's always building something. She's always in a new costume. And so I thought it would be nice to have her on and have her talk a little bit about how she started and what she's done over the course of the past few years that she's been a cosplayer. So I'm going to bring her on and introduce everybody to her. Hi there, how are you?
Hello, I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing good. So you're in Massachusetts?
Yes, I live south of Boston. I work in Boston, but I live just south of Boston, far enough out that we actually have a yard and a driveway, so I can work on props outside, but close enough that I can still take public transit to get in, which is nice.
And so what's the weather like there right now?
It's beautiful today. I think it was 70s. I was out supervising my husband building a fence this morning, trying to get some concrete poured, and the weather for that was pretty nice.
That's great. I'm here in Chicago, and it's like super duper hot outside. So I wish it was in the 70s.
That's probably coming our way.
It might be. It might be. So tell us a little bit about yourself. So you're a cosplayer. You travel around the country for cosplaying, correct?
Mainly to Dragon Con in Atlanta and then Celebration Star Wars. So I haven't done, I would have been doing a lot more traveling, except for COVID-19, but we've traveled to Atlanta, to Chicago. We went to Quebec Comic-Con last year, and we went out to Los Angeles for the Rise of Skywalker premiere. So, but we're hoping to do more once things open back up again.
So you are a cosplayer, and you do mainly Star Wars stuff. Is that correct?
Yes, mainly Star Wars. My non-Star Wars, I have Peggy Carter from First Avenger. I did a Caprica 6, the red dress, which was really fun. I did that one last summer. But 95% of everything is Star Wars for sure.
Okay, so what costumes? So besides the Peggy Carter and some of the other stuff, what costumes have you done for Star Wars primarily?
All right. So if we go by character, for Leia, I've done the senatorial Leia, the classic buns, the Yavin ceremony dress at the end of A New Hope, which also the white dress. For my husband, I've done both versions of Han from that film. In Empire Strikes Back, I did the Hoth ensemble and the Bespin escape. I'm working on the hand embroidery for Bespin, the Bespin cape, but that's like, I have like 400 hours more of embroidery at least to do for that. I did the Ewok Village Leia, which I made out of cow suede. I did from the Princess on Lothal episode of Rebels, I did that version of Leia. I also, from the flashback scene in Rise of Skywalker, I did that version of Leia, because seeing Leia with a lightsaber on the big screen was basically everything I've ever wanted since I was 5 years old. That's all the Leias. For Rey, I did Resistance Rey. So from the end of, I made it after the end of Force Awakens, where we only saw it for a little bit. And then when The Last Jedi came out, we saw all these more details. And I was like, I'm not going to remake that because I finished it. And I did Episode 9 Rey. I did Padme's, the black corset gown from Attack of the Clones. What else? I have a couple generic Jedi I've made. I have an Imperial staff officer. I have a New Hope stunt stormtrooper, which is so much fun. I have Kira's Crimson Dawn dress. I have Jyn Erso, and I'm probably forgetting. I have a lot of costumes. And
well,
then,
I know you did the Princess Leia, the pre Star Wars Princess Leia, the one from the concept art.
Yeah, so the Rebels, actually I might be able to pull up a picture of that. The Rebels design drew really heavily from the concept art. So let me see. I think I might be able to pull that one up. Which is what I really love that. And there's the holster is a little different. So at some point, oh, here we go. All right. Let's see, the screen sharing cooperates. Oh yeah, that's gonna work. All right. So one of the things when I'm making, I also try to digitize and share my patterns, and I share them all for free because it's not my intellectual property. And also one of my favorite things is to actually meet people who've made my costume. So here we go, perfect picture. So on this side in the black and white is one of the Macquarie concept art sketches. And I don't know if I can zoom in a little more. I'm not gonna zoom. And then the Rebels version in the middle and mine on the right. So it's really, I mean, it's there. I think the holster is a little different, but the main difference is it's just like solid colored pants instead of, let's see. All right. And then I'm going to stop sharing because if I'm sharing screen, then usually the people you can't see. But yeah, I love those designs. I love that one.
So that stuff is really neat. And you've done a lot. And a lot of the people who I talk to at conventions, they do, some of them do a lot of costumes, some do a little bit. And, but I'm curious, how did you start? What made you decide to become a cosplayer?
So that goes back to, I mean, my mom taught me the basics of sewing. She made me a very, very basic Princess Leia costume when I was a lot younger. But I played tennis in college, but then I got injured. And while I was on crutches, I ran into the drama club people and they said, oh, you should join drama club. So I started sewing and making costumes for theater. And after college, I continued making costumes for some community theater. I used to do community theater. I can't stay up late enough for rehearsals anymore. But then through one of my community theater friends, he and his boyfriend were LARPers. They did live action role playing, and they introduced my husband and I to that. So I was making kind of a lot of Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings type inspired costumes for me to wear, for my husband to wear, for cast members and friends to wear. And some of our friends from the LARP community said, oh, you need to come to Dragon Con with us. And we were like, what is that? And they started telling us about cosplaying and making costumes to go to conventions. And Dragon Con 2016 was the first convention we actually went to and the first time we cosplayed, and the bug bit us really hard. It bit me a lot harder than my husband. He'll wear whatever I make for him and not complain when he can't actually sit down in his Han Solo pants. But that was really where we just dove headfirst into the costume making. And well, I dove into the costume making. We joke that my husband's job is to make sure that I don't starve to death when I get caught up in a project. So but it was while we were at because I think it wasn't until last year that I actually went to my first panel at Dragon Con, because I just run from photo shoot to photo shoot, because my favorite game is trying to figure out how many different costumes I can fit in. So people do meetups for specific characters. So I try to change from Leia into Rey to meet up with all the different people who make those costumes and love those characters. But that was kind of where I really got that bug. That was the first time. I think I only brought 3 or 4 costumes that year.
So what were they?
That year was Peggy Carter. Peggy Carter, first Avenger, the skirt suit. Let's see, I wonder if I have those pictures handy. Ceremonial Leia, the Yavin ceremony Leia. Okay, hold on, I can share again. I found, it looks like I was actually good. And sometimes I'm better than others with actually documenting things. Okay, so I had my Yavin ceremony Leia. I think I brought, this might have been the second year, and I guess I brought ceremonial Leia. No, so I didn't. Okay, so Yavin ceremony Leia, she went. Those were later. My Peggy Carter, and I think this was 2017, so I didn't have my Imperial officer then. I didn't have Rey then. All right, so that was less helpful than I thought it was gonna be, but there's those costumes at least. And then I think I also brought one of my LARP characters, like a fancy Victorian poofy bustle gown. And my husband had Han and Linguini from Ratatouille, and I think I was trying to pull together a really basic Bucky Barnes for him, but sometimes we stick together at conventions, but he wanted to run off, I think, to Artist's Alley, and he bought a bunch of comic books and art. So now I have my friends who I stay with through running around to photo shoot. So he does his own thing, and sometimes we connect, and it's fun.
That's really cool. So, all right. So to go back to 2016. Mm-hmm. So you went to Dragon Con, and you'd never been to a convention before. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and you came with 3 different costumes, and you had never cosplayed before, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so how long did the costumes take to make? That's question number 1. I've got another one too.
Yep. It really depends. I finally started keeping track. Mm-hmm. I use an app called Hours Tracker, and ceremonial, the Yavin ceremony Leia, I don't know. My guess is maybe 40 hours. But it really kind of varies. The one, like Ewok Village Leia, which is more recent, that took me 50 hours. Let's see. It tends to vary between, if I'm making a pattern from scratch, and when I'm pattern making now, it takes me a little longer than it used to in some ways, because now that I know I'm going to ultimately share each of the patterns I make, I have to think about how do I make this clearer. Because the Yavin ceremony Leia costume, I made the pattern, and I realized when I digitized that one and shared it afterwards, I had a lot of people messaging me saying, hey, I'm using your pattern, thanks for sharing. What's this piece, or what's that, or where does that go? And I realized I could make life a lot easier for people if I actually made those markings a lot clearer. But I'd say typically a costume takes anywhere from, if it's more complex, from like 40 to 150 hours. Like Lothal Leia took 45 hours. Jen Eyre, I think, was my, other than the hand embroidery on Bespin Leia, Jen Eyre took me 164 hours, because I think I spent 8 hours just looking at screen caps trying to figure out where the seams on her scarf went. But I love all the really little details. So I'll spend a lot of time trying to get them right, and I like figuring out how to recreate something I see on screen. like, what was it? So episode 9, Ray was really neat because we had a lot of references and I'd actually gotten to see the costume in person at the premiere, but that one only took me 77 hours, which it still isn't quite finished because I have some accessories I want to make. But I think the fastest costume, the quickest one to make would be the one you met me in, Cruella de Porg, because I think she took, I have my tracker up to see. She took me 8 hours to make. And it's kind of, what kind of cracks me up is at one point really early on when I started cosplaying, one of my friends said, the costumes you spend the most time on, the costumes you put the most effort into, there's no guarantee that those are the ones that are gonna get the biggest reactions. But sometimes it's the one you just throw together with a glue gun in 8 hours and some giant googly eyes that just explodes, that gets so much attention. I have a Porg shirt on right now. Let's see. Yeah. I wore one of my macabre Porg shirts, but Cruella Porg was like 8 1/3 hours, and it's just so much fun.
That's really funny. It's interesting, and I think the idea that you're spending like millions and millions of hours, and then the stuff that people like is the. But my assumption is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and this is going off the path that I laid out here, but you just said that the easy ones are the ones that get the most attention.
Sometimes.
My assumption is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you are doing this primarily for yourself, not for the attention. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah. The time, sometimes I'll when I'm doing Rebel Legion or 50, we work it's all the same troop around here, but when I'm deciding which costume I'm wearing to a troop, I will think about the audience. I will think about, I typically, if I'm wearing Leia, I'll pretty much always wear senatorial Leia with the cinnamon buns, because that's what the kids are most likely to recognize. That's that classic. If it's cold, or if we're doing a hockey rink troop, or if it's cold, I'll wear Hoth Leia, because that one's also, but that's really the only time that I'll think about, okay, what's going to be the more popular costume to wear. When I'm picking what I'm going to make, it's usually because there's some kind of weird, tricky design challenge that I want to figure out. Like after Force Awakens, I decided to make Resistance Rey, the gray vest one, because the vest pattern has these shoulder pads that are really complicated. And I said, that looks really annoying to make. I want to figure that out. So that's why I made that. Not realizing just how complicated Jakku Rey is with all the dyeing. But at that point in time, I didn't actually want to dye fabric, which was famous last words, because then when we saw the Vanity Fair, I forgot, I have another costume that I forgot to mention in my list earlier. When I saw the Vanity Fair shoot and we saw Admiral Holdo's costume, I was immediately like, I gotta make that. And I waited until after the film came out because I wanted to make sure I liked the character. But that one was one where I wanted to make it because the figuring out the pattern was going to be complicated. And I also decided I wanted to figure out how to dye the fabric, which I'd not dyed anything before. But one of the tricky things when you're trying to make the screen accurate costumes is you can't always get the right fabric, or somebody finds fabric. Like I have friends in New York and in LA who get the most amazing fabric, but no one else can get it because you have to be in that specific store at the same time. So when I saw Holdo, I was like, all right, I'm going to figure out how to dye this fabric so I can share the dye formula. So anyone, anywhere who can get their hands on the dye can make this and not have to stress because they can't find the right fabric. I shared the pattern for that too. And that was a really complicated, fun costume to do the pattern. And I don't know if anyone's actually used my dye formula, but I know a bunch of people have made Holdo using my pattern, or using my pattern as a starting point, which is just, it's absolutely one of my favorite things, to meet someone who's used it or getting to talk to people who have. so that was, again, that was another one, like that was a challenge. I wanted to figure that out. Sometimes it's that costume challenge. Other times, like with Jedi Flashback Leia, I wanted to see Leia have a lightsaber on screen since I was a little girl, and since I was a teenager reading the expanded universe novels where she was a Jedi and was running around. And that I wanted to make that, because that was my childhood. And there were definitely challenges with there. I got into 3D printing because of all of this, and that was a lot, but I like figuring out how to figure things out and figuring out new things. And it's just, sometimes it's because I love a character so much, and sometimes it's because I want to figure out the challenges, and and often it's both.
Would you say that it's more creativity or more problem solving? Is it more I'm going to solve this jigsaw puzzle, or is it more I'm going to be really creative and do this crazy thing?
I think it's more, for me, it tends to be more the problem solving. It's been a while since I did creative costumes. Like, I love the people who do mashups, or they do their own versions. I haven't been doing that in a while because I've been focused on kind of getting that screen accuracy. The creative problem solving, like certain things like with Holdo supporting the back cape, I had to kind of be creative and figure that out. It's definitely a different type of creativity. That problem solving it's more stubbornness, I think, than artistry necessarily. But there does that artistic eye creative element does come in terms of, like, my body shape is not the same as any of the actresses in Star Wars. So whether I'm too tall, some other measurements are off, I always have to figure out, okay, how do I adjust those proportions? Or how do I do something a little differently so it works for my body, so it works, or so that it works so that it's comfortable. Like, I ended up adding, I remade my Hoth Leia jumpsuit to make it slightly less warm, and I added an invisible zipper all the way around the waist, so that I can take the top separately off if I need to, like, use the bathroom, or if I have the vest on, I can unzip the back to get some ventilation. And that kind of I guess that's creativity in terms of figuring out, like, oh, here's something I hadn't thought of doing. But Cruella de Porg is, I think, my most creative. And she also, I don't think, it wouldn't have been was it Celebration? But I don't know if my husband was with me at the time, but okay, I forgot. I have a couple of very creative costumes. So Cruella de Porg was actually my second ridiculous Star Wars costume. Let me see if I can find a picture. I don't know. So I guess I am a little more creative sometimes. I don't know. I think the inspiration for this one, and we didn't pack it and bring it to Celebration because I didn't think it was going to work with the setup, and my husband was very sad about it, but that's okay, he survived. So we did a troupe at the Boston Children's Museum, and in the gift shop they had, like, little flashlight swords. They're supposed to be lightsabers, but they had that was it. They had, like, a T-Rex on the bottom. I said, okay, there needs to be something happening. Like, somehow a dinosaur and Star Wars needs to combine. And, I almost have it pulled up. Okay. And the beautiful creation that happened, let me see if I can get that up. The monstrosity that happened was, right, here we go. The T-Rex Hut Slayer Leia that I made for my husband, because I had this idea. I needed to do something Star Wars related with one of those inflatable T-Rexes. And so I made the gold bikini out of duct tape. And that was that was my first ridiculous Star Wars costume I made. That I feel like is a bit more creative than my screen accurate things, because I was just trying to like figure that out. The other ridiculous one I made, so Jawas, you know, we got to see more Jawas in The Mandalorian.
Mm-hmm.
However, do we really know what's underneath the Jawas? Like, do we know? We don't know. We have no idea. And if I can find the picture, I can show you what I think the answer is. So actually, why don't you go ahead, if you want to ask the next question, I'll find that one.
Sure. So you decided that you were going to go to Dragon Con.
Yes.
And you had never been before. You're in Massachusetts. Dragon Con is in Atlanta.
Yes.
How far in advance did you buy the tickets?
Well, Dragon Con doesn't sell out, which is very fortunate. I think it can be like over 80,000 people. The tricky thing with Dragon Con, I guess like everywhere, is the hotels. You want to get in a host hotel because then you can change. And if you're like me and you like to change costumes like 3 times a day.
So were you doing that at that point though? Because that was the first time you were at a convention. Were you changing costumes a lot?
I think I did 2 changes a day. I think I did 2. I think I did like 2 switches. And I think I did 2, but still just being in the same hotel is a lot. It's nice because it's a lot easier to take a break. It's a lot. I mean, it's just so much. It's more convenient. But that's the tricky part. And yeah, the hotel. And I think somehow, typically what I'll do is I'll book a refundable hotel that's a little farther out and just keep trying to get one of the host hotels. And so far, knock on wood, we've always managed to do that, which is not a given. I think when the celebration window had opened up, I managed to get one really close, and that would have been really important because I have a very tight schedule of changes, and which now that I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but now that I've gotten more involved and interested in the photography aspect, I've got to kind of decide, do I pare down the costumes, or do I pare down the costumes and actually maybe like walk around in plain clothes and take pictures, or do I figure out which costumes work well for taking photos? And as you probably guess, I'm kind of thinking about which costumes I have would work well for like walking around and taking pictures. And probably once conventions start happening again, because in Boston we've got a couple anime conventions and fandoms, which like I don't know, and video game conventions. So my plan is to go to those and just take pictures, because I don't necessarily have cosplays that work for those. Okay, I found the picture. Are you ready to find out what actually Jawas look like without all the stuff on them? Here we go.
Sure. And
this was such a fun photo op because Eunice was just cracking up the whole time. Okay, there we go. That is Cruella de Porg, and that was my assistant who I had hired to help me find, see if I can zoom in a little, to help me find more porgs. And that's my husband, who went along with my wild idea of like, what if a Jawa is actually just a dozen porgs standing on top of each other's shoulders disguised as a Jawa? And you can't, I mean, this isn't a video, so you can't tell, but his hands are 2 of the little robotic porgs that you'd push their belly and they'd roll around the table and squawk. I skinned them, and around and I drilled holes in the back so I can mount them on a belt. So around his waist are the 2 animatronic porg skeletons. So if he bumps them, he can bump them and they make noise, and you see his robes kind of rustle like there's porgs underneath. And it was really fun. That was this ventilation isn't great for him in that mask, because there's a fur porg on the front. It's a fencing mask, and I put little fans in there, and if you can kind of see that there's like a water line, because we had a little I was actually using it outside. I've used it outside for non-costuming stuff, but it's a little neck wrap you can put ice cubes in, and it melts on the back of your neck to help keep you cool. So he was using that with the jowl. I will often do that when I'm wearing Corella de Porg, because it's a faux fur coat and it gets really, really, really warm. But that's why we can't wear them too much. You kind of have to go out and do the thing, and then go back and drink a lot of water and cool off. But so those are my creative costumes, which I sometimes forget about. And I guess I don't give myself enough credit for coming up with ridiculous, evil, horrible mashup costumes.
I think they're fun. I think it's interesting. You know, no matter how long they took you, they're interesting. So explain who you're standing with besides your husband in that photo.
Oh yeah. Hold on. So I'm gonna butcher his name, which I really shouldn't, but Eunice Suntamo, he's the actor who took over playing Chewbacca when Peter Mayhew wasn't able to do all the physical activities anymore, and he's so nice, and he's absolutely amazing. Actually, I think in here, these are all at Celebration, we actually, not zoomed in that much. We did one of the photo ops with Peter Mayhew, and I'm gonna start to get a little choked up, but he died, I think, about 2 weeks later, and he had so many health problems, and he was so selfless, and he must have been in so much pain, but he and was there to give that experience and give so many fans a chance to get a photo with him. And just such an amazing, selfless human being. And my husband, because I mean, there's always that argument of why didn't Chewie get a medal? And my husband was like, "Oh, I'm gonna wear my Yavin Ceremony Han configuration, because it's like the picture with Chewbacca." And I had tweeted that. I Instagrammed. I like posted the photo on Instagram and said how, yeah, my husband thought it'd be funny to be like, "Yeah, Chewie, like I got this medal, you didn't get it." And Peter Mayhew actually liked that Instagram post, which was absolutely amazing. And then, I mean, and then his health must have been in such bad shape at that point, because then about 2 weeks later, he died. But up until the end of his life, he was just doing so much for fans. And I mean, the Peter Mayhew Foundation is an absolutely amazing organization about just relieving pain and doing things to help people who are having health problems and issues. But that was just, I was so glad we got a chance to have that moment with him. But so that was original Chewbacca, who passed the torch to Eunice, who is, it's just, I feel like anyone who plays Chewbacca is almost automatically an amazing person, because all the costumers who do Chewbacca I've met are also amazing. So I think there's something about putting on the Wookiee suit that just, you have to be an awesome person to do that.
So I'm going to ask you a question about this stuff. And I want to talk about the cosplay community, but before I do that, so you've obviously met a bunch of the Star Wars actors, and I know that some of the posts that I had seen on Instagram before Rise of Skywalker came out, and I think it was the premiere, which was like 3 or 4 days beforehand.
Yeah.
And I had seen it that night, and I was actually messaging Jen to see what she thought of the movie, and we could openly talk about it. But so you have been doing a lot of Lucasfilm stuff. You've been doing a lot of these events. You've met a lot of these actors, and at the premiere, Jen was dressed up as well, and she was like right there. You're right in the front line, right? Did you met the actors as they were walking down the red carpet?
Yep, here we go. Let's see, I'll share again. So I managed to get a bunch of selfies with the stars, and they were so generous to stop. But this one with Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, it was just that it was absolutely amazing. I mean, he's such an awesome person, and who is not afraid to use his platform to speak up when things are wrong. And it was just it was magic. I still kind of have to pinch myself to remind myself that that happened. I got a selfie with Mark Hamill. It was amazing.
So tell me about the experience with Lucasfilm. How did that come about? You obviously, we had mentioned at the beginning that you are a member of the 501st and Rebel Legion. And which one came first, and what opportunities did that open up for you? Obviously, you were invited to the premiere. So you ended up doing some really neat things because you were a member of those organizations. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, so how I first, going back to how I first got involved at that first Dragon Con, I had my ceremonial Leia dress, and I went to some of the Star Wars meetups, and I started talking to Rebel Legion people, and they were amazing, and they were so nice, and they encouraged me to apply and to join. And locally in New England, Alderaan base is the Rebel base, and I'm currently the commanding officer. And then New England Garrison is the 501st side. We also have Firaxan clan of the Mando Mercs and the New England Droid Builders. And locally, we all get along so well that a lot of times we forget we're technically separate groups, and a lot of new members don't realize that we are separate groups. So I joined with my ceremonial Leia costume, but I remember very vividly my first troop. It was a little library convention, which I think those are some of my favorites, because for a lot of kids and a lot of families, the tickets to one of the big commercial conventions are really expensive, and they're very much out of reach. So in New England, there are tons of libraries that put on these little conventions, mini conventions, which are also a lot better for people with sensory challenges or anything going on. It's a lot quieter. And while we were there, I was watching some of the kids, some of the teenagers interacting with some of our stormtroopers, and the stormtroopers did not break for a second. One of the kids, I remember, came up to the storm. I think it was a teenage boy, came up to the stormtrooper, said, "Where did you get your armor?" And he goes, and he's got the voice changer. He says, "It was provided to me by the Empire." He's like, no, like, how much did it cost? And he said, it was free. I enlisted with the Empire and I got this armor. And the kid tried so hard, because this is a kid who was old enough to know that we're not really from space. But I was just watching the stormtrooper, because when you're a face character, there's some of the younger kids, you can have that suspension of disbelief. They're young. They see you, you're real. But for when you get the older kids who are kind of like, no, I know you're just a regular person, but especially if it's a face character, because I can do my hair to look like what Carrie looked like, but I'm not Carrie. Although I do have a number of friends who, especially if they do contouring, they look so spot on. It is eerie and amazing. And sometimes, especially some of my friends who do the general Leia, I can't even look at them sometimes, because it's just like, you just think about Carrie, and it's just, and how tragic her loss was. But when you have the bucket on and no one can see your face, that's where you could have just stepped off that film. And that was so magic. And at that moment, I was like, okay, I want to build one of those eventually. And I think last summer or 2 summers ago was when I finished my Stormtrooper. But in the early spring of 2017, I made my Imperial Staff Officer, and then joined the 501st as well. So that's how I got involved.
What was the application like?
So on the Rebel Legion side, it's different than the 501st, and it's pretty interesting. On the Rebel side, there are costume judges at Legion wide. So there are Leia judges or Rey judges or Jedi judges. The judges typically, specialize. which is really good because for royalty judges, I mean, if you look at any of Padme's costumes, they are so complicated. You really need someone who knows what they're looking at. So you take a minimum of 5 pictures of your costume, full length, front, left, right, back, and then you take an action shot. So if you have a blaster, you'll pose with that, or your lightsaber. And you, for the Rebel Legion, you submit that to the main Rebel Legion, and a judge looks at it. They compare it to the costume standards and screen references. They may send feedback, and there's a lot of people who don't like getting feedback and can struggle with feedback. But the judges do a really great job of saying, all right, you've done so much work. It looks so great. You're so close. Here's a couple adjustments and then you'll be ready. And I think giving supportive feedback is such an important skill. On the 501st side, the judging is done on the local level. And last year and a half ago, I was one of the people doing the judging on the 501st side. So I'm, which as I was saying is we're such close members of groups. There was a time where I was commanding officer of Alderaan base while still one of the garrison membership liaisons for the 501st. So the process is similar in that you want that front, back, left, right action shot pictures, except on the 501st side, they send it to the local people, the GMLs. Some garrisons only have one. We had a team of 3, which was great because some of us were more knowledgeable about certain costumes than others. Like we had an amazing First Order Stormtrooper. So when we had those come through, he knew everything about those and the armor. And I knew all about the original Stormtrooper armor because I had built that and the soft costumes like the officers and Kira. But we would be the ones giving that feedback, which it could be really great to have that be local because we might see someone in person, or at troops, we could kind of say, oh, here's like, do you see how they did that in their armor? Because with the armor costumes, there's a lot of stuff that goes on inside to make the armor more comfortable that you wouldn't necessarily realize. And you're not judged on what's inside the armor. It's just on the outside that matters, but there's a lot of things you can do to make it more comfortable. So for people who are interested in building one of those more complicated costumes, it's pretty much universally recommended to go and wrangle. And by wrangle, you're helping people put on the pieces they can't get on themselves, and helping, because the visibility is not great. So you're helping them not trip over small children, helping them navigate places. We recommend people do that before they start building armor, because you don't want to buy a kit that you're going to build and then only to realize that you're really claustrophobic if you put a helmet on. Like when I picked up my Stormtrooper kit, one of our friends came with us for the ride, and the armor maker had a helmet, and she's like, oh, let me try this on. And she put it on her head, and it was so claustrophobic, she started almost having a panic attack. And she is someone who would not be making a costume with a bucket. So she's someone who should do like an officer or a Jedi, because you can't handle that. But I wasn't necessarily wrangling. I had my soft Rebel Legion costumes or my Imperial officer, but every time I was at a troop, when there was a Stormtrooper, when people were starting to get unpacked and getting ready to gear up, I'd be over there looking and say, okay, how did you set up the fans inside your helmet? Because you need to have fans in your helmet or your lenses fog up, you just overheat. How did you, so I have like suspenders in my Stormtrooper that the torso pieces snap onto that keeps them from falling down. And it's really neat because you get to learn so much. And I think when you join the Star Wars costuming community, you automatically gain 10 to 15,000 new friends because you have all these people with this common interest you can talk about. So I think maybe that's a good segue into some of those opportunities talking about. I think the biggest opportunity I've had, I'm just in general, is getting a chance to talk to all these people and learn from all these people. And I have some friends who are professional costumers or people who know people who've worked on sets and scenes and can say, okay, my friend told me that they use this kind of fabric, or that they were wearing this underneath. So as much as having those amazing opportunities like the premiere are the absolute icing on the cake, it's really that community. And so you asked about how that premiere worked. So the 501st and Rebel Legion, and also Mandalorian Mercs, and there's some other clubs as well, but we're recognized by Lucasfilm. And because we have these costume standards, because you have to meet certain standards and get judged before you can go to events, Lucasfilm will extend special privileges to us. And one of the things that has been done traditionally is members get a chance to go to premieres. In past years, I'm not sure how. I know one of my friends got to go to, I think, the Last Jedi premiere because he had been Trooper of the Month for the 501st. But for this premiere, I think because it was the culmination, the end of the Skywalker saga, Lucasfilm reached out to the 501st and to the Rebel Legion and said, okay, we would like for costumed people with all these different costumes to be at this premiere, but we'd like at least one person from each state in the United States and Puerto Rico. So they then reached out to all the members and said, okay, if you have one of these costumes and you will be able to take time off from work to fly out to Los Angeles, somewhere in this range, but we don't know, we don't know exactly which day, and we can't tell you exactly which day. And once you find out exactly which day, you can't tell anyone else except your boss, and you have to be very vague. You can attend the premiere. So that was when I submitted, I applied. I had actually, so I'm a teacher, and taking time off outside of vacation time is really challenging. But the universe, the stars were aligned because I had made the decision prior to this announcement of this opportunity being made. I'd made the decision that I needed to leave where I was and go somewhere else. And I had given my notice, and then we heard about this opportunity, and I was thinking to myself, like, ooh, if I don't have another job lined up, I probably shouldn't be spending money on airfare to go out there, but this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I'll apply, we'll see what happens. My husband was very supportive. And he just said, yeah, like, let's see what happens. And it was when I found out that I made it, I was absolutely thrilled. And again, the stars aligned. The new job that I was starting like a few weeks before the premiere, they were super supportive. They really wanted to hire me, because when I was interviewing and they made the offer, I said, I want to accept, but you need to know I will need to take off between 2 and 3 days on this week, it was the week before Christmas break, which is a really tough week for teachers to take off. So fortunately it was at the beginning, but they were really supportive. My husband flew out with me as well. Spouses weren't able to go to the premiere, but he had a lot of fun in LA. We went to Galaxy's Edge and Disneyland the day before, and it was amazing. And that, I think if that is the highlight of the most amazing Star Wars experience I ever have, then I really can't complain. Again, nothing can really top that, but I think I pulled up a couple pictures for a couple other opportunities I had, if we have time for me to talk Sure. about those. All right. So one of the other things that's really fun is when we get to, oh, is that the right one? Okay. All right, good, I have the right one. So when we have the opportunity to do sporting events, so I got to this would have been 2019. I got to be Princess Leia at Fenway Park for the annual Star Wars troop, which was so nerve-wracking. If you talk to any Leia cosplayer who does the cinnamon buns, the stress of getting the buns right is it's a lot. Like, I didn't even apply with this costume to the premiere because I didn't want to put myself through the stress of getting the hair right, even if I started 3 hours earlier. so that I got to go out on the field. And then again, we have so much fun with our, especially when we're trooping, when we're rebels trooping with Imperials. If I'm trooping with a Vader, I just glare at him the entire time. And then when a kid comes around, I think I got it. When a kid comes, especially a little Leia comes around, it's just, I mean, I would not trade that Rise of Skywalker premiere for anything, but any troop, whether it's a library where there's 2 kids who show up, whenever there's a little mini Leia, that's why I love this. That's why I do it. That's my favorite thing. I think, let's see. And then in terms of other things, so within that costuming, I had never done any costume contests, but some of the other costumers I talked to online and haven't met were talking about applying to the Celebration costume contest, the Chicago one. And I figured, you know what, I'll apply. I don't think I'll get in, but if I do get in, I'll get a chance to like meet a lot of really amazing costumers, because I knew a lot of people who were talking about applying, and I was like, I'll actually get to meet them in person and hang out with them backstage, and I'll get to look at their costumes close up. So that was why I applied, and I actually ended up winning my category, the needlework category, which was really awesome. And I ended up, my face was on the front page of StarWars.com, which was pretty wild. It was like I was like nerd famous for 5 minutes. It was so neat.
Did you take screenshots of it, I hope?
Oh yeah. And it's still the article's still up there, so I can pull it up. And I think, I'm trying to remember I think someone else, a friend I made in the contest, because we were hanging out. I was scrolling through Facebook, and she had posted a link to the article, and it was my face was the picture, like, you know, when you post the link, there's a picture, and it was my face, and I'm scrolling, and I was like, what? And I was kind of like, what? So that was really neat. But it's those kind of experiences, having those touches of being fancy or whatever. It's really the people, like the people in that costume contest. We have a chat on Facebook, and we still talk. And when because this weekend today would have been the last day of Star Wars Celebration, and it's really, I mean, it was a really hard one for because there's so many people that we're friends, and we only get to see all these friends at these conventions. So this was, especially with everything with COVID and everything going on in the world right now, it was a tough one. And we started messaging, and we shared the links to our photo galleries, and the people who went to the Rise of Skywalker premiere, like, we have a Facebook group where we still like check in and we share memories, and it's really magical. And again, it's like, you know, the real prize was the friends we made along the way. And it's so true with Star Wars costuming. And I really, it's tough this year, but I'm so glad that things are canceled, so that when we have conventions again, we won't have friends missing.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, the stuff you're talking about. Not actually. Let me ask that question in a second. I have another question for you. So Star Wars Celebration 2019. I was there on the last day. So for anyone who doesn't know, it was supposed to be a 3-day event, and then it became 4. Or was it supposed to be 4 and it became 5? There was like a Monday added because it sold out like that.
Oh yeah.
And I live in Chicago. I didn't even know it was going on. And then I like found out at like a couple weeks beforehand maybe, and my buddy got tickets, and he's like, do you want to go? And I was like, because I saw it, and it's like, I want to spend that amount of money for a once in a lifetime thing. Do I really want to do that? And then he bought me a ticket, so I was like, okay, well, I'll go. And you know, and you walk around the convention. It was the last day, so everything had been picked through. It had been like mayhem for the 3 or 4 days beforehand, and you had all the people who were selling things desperate to sell things because they had to go home, and I'm walking through the convention. I go to a lot of comic conventions, and for the most part, I'm behind a table in Artist Alley. But I see a lot of different things. And I was walking through the convention, and I was just kind of like, okay. And then we get to these three-dimensional displays that the 501st created.
Mm-hmm.
And the best photos I got out of there was for that. And Jody McCorders, who runs the 501st in Joliet, Illinois, who I know because he hosts a comic convention every year. I messaged him afterwards. I was like, that was the best part of the convention, because it was. I wasn't really involved in any of the stars. I wasn't privy to any of the events, but that, for the average goer, there were X-Wing fighters and TIE fighters and all kinds of things that were built. And then there was a Jabba the Hutt, there was an Ewok villager, all these costumes. Were you involved in that, or was that something that happened locally?
So what my understanding is, well, Lucasfilm will kind of put out a call to the different groups to say, hey, if you have this, it might depend on if they're going for a certain theme. So they'll put out the call and say, hey, does anyone have any cool big props? And I believe what will happen is, for certain of those props, if they have to be transported a ways, that gets really expensive. So I believe they can get reimbursed for some of that. Some of them were like the Falcon, and I think maybe the X-Wing, but some of those are actually professional prop builders. And the X-Wing was shipped from Europe, I think, in a giant shipping container.
Was it really?
But the Ewok village was definitely one of the garrisons. I got pictures, and when I heard that so other reasons I make costumes, when I heard that was gonna be there, one of my friends had made and shared a pattern for that dress, and I was like, ooh, that'll fit without much modification at all. And one of my local good friends has an amazing Wicket costume. And so I was like, okay, I have to make Ewok Village Leia, because one, when Colleen is trooping in Wicket, it's super fun to walk around with her. And two, like, getting pictures in the little Ewok village. And then when Warwick was there and getting pictures, like, that was just the icing on the cake. But the kind of sets and props you make, the various garrisons and bases around the world, they do that for conventions very regularly. And in New England, we one of our guys, and we'll do like parties for sanding parties, so people come over to help him sand. His like Falcon chess booth with the Deljark table. I mean, I compare the pictures at the convention sitting at that table to the ones I got at Galaxy's Edge, and you can barely tell the difference. I mean, it's amazing. We've locally, like, they built the trash compactor. I mean, the Jabba the Hutt at Celebration, 501st or Rebel Legion people built that. I mean, it's kind of, I think it's really good that we don't have a garage at my house, because that would probably be it'd be the logical next thing. Like, my husband, he got me a 3D printer for Christmas last year, and he got me a resin printer because it has a small print bed. He's like, yeah, I got that so you can't start filling our house with droids like one of our friends. But then the resin printers, they work for small detail stuff, but I couldn't have printed my Jedi Flashback Leia helmet on that, so I promptly bought myself a big printer. I haven't started printing droids yet, but maybe that'll happen. I don't know.
Well, you know, you could always do the ones from episode 1 that have been in the Mandalorian, the ones that like spring up.
Yeah. I had convinced him that it wouldn't be the worst idea, to print, you know, a droid to carry our baby Yoda around. And I forget how tall that one is, but I didn't.
So, okay, so the other question I had for you, and it's really interesting because, you know, when I'm at a convention, and a lot of the people who come up and talk to me and who are interested in my book are cosplayers. And so I talk to a lot of them regularly, and some of them have the same the big conventions I go to are Wizard World Chicago and C2E2, and I've gone to Baltimore a couple of years in a row as well. And a lot of them, you know, they'll come and they'll be like, well, I was in this costume yesterday, and then I was in a different one today. Or most of them will be in the same costume all 3 days. And some of them are from out of town, some of them are not. Most of them, I would say, are not. But the stuff that I'm hearing from you is a little bit different, and it is Star Wars. But I'm curious, and you may know the answer to this question, you may not. It sounds to me like the process for doing the cosplay work for Star Wars, if you're going to be in the Legion or the 501st, is it's pretty intense. I mean, it sounds like work that you're not getting paid for in a lot of ways, although you're paid for with these different experiences and with these different people who you get to know. So my question is, and then you can comment, is do you know of other organizations which may not necessarily be Star Wars that have the same kind of intensity that you're describing with the 501st and the Rebel Legion Lucasfilm?
So there are some incredibly, amazingly intense Battlestar Galactica costumers. So when I got to meet a bunch of them at Dragon Con last year when I made Caprica 6, and I mean the detail they do, it's the same kind of thing. They don't necessarily do the kind of events that that the Legions do, but I mean that it's another group with people who just love those minute details, and they have a lot less in terms of reference material. There's Ghostbusters groups, which are really neat, and we see them at a lot of the library conventions. I think there was an event at the Museum of Science last year, so we got to see a lot of the groups locally, and a lot of these are national or worldwide as well. I think we saw there was a Harry Potter group that had a lot of really amazing costumes and a lot of detail. There's also a lot of what you tend to see, at least in what I've noticed, is there are a lot of kind of more general cosplay groups, like that'll have Disney princesses, superheroes, those kind of costumes that'll also do like the hospital troops, those are so emotional and absolutely my favorite, and I can't wait until it's safe to do those again. But you'll see kind of like a generic like hero, princess, Disney costume group. I don't know necessarily how they work in terms of if they have costume standards, or if they also have the relationship with, it wouldn't be Lucasfilm, it would be with Disney. But there are, I mean, it's for if the kind of experiences and troops and details that 501st and Rebel Legion do are of interest to someone, then it's a fantastic goal. But there are also a ton, it's not the only goal with Star Wars costuming. And I think it's really important for people to remember that it's just fine to make a costume to wear however you want and do whatever you want. But I think those are the only, I've seen Star Trek groups.
There's a million Star Trek groups out there, actually.
And it's funny because people always want to act like we hate each other. It's like, why would the nerds gang up on each other? Like we need like each other to. And I think one of the costumers I absolutely adore and admire so much, and got to run into her at Dragon Con last year, but she did a video where someone was like, where she starts out in her senatorial lay, and someone was like, oh, are you the Star Trek cosplayer someone was telling me about? And she kind of like slinks back and comes back in her like Star Trek uniform.
That's funny. Well, you know, it's that stuff, and this is actually a side note to the stuff we're saying, the Star Wars versus Star Trek stuff it seems to me that that's a throwback to the 1970s. Star Trek came first. I think that the stars of Star Trek, people like William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, had actually said that they owed George Lucas a debt, because had he not done Star Wars, they never would have started doing the Trek movies. But I think some of that was also fueled by the online rivalry that Carrie Fisher and William Shatner had on Twitter.
Oh.
And it was all fake. And I think that Shatner tried to tweak Mark Hamill too, and Mark Hamill just wanted nothing to do with it, and he just ignored it. But they were fighting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was just something for the fans, is what it was. But I think that in general, when it comes to two different groups, whether it's comic books or Star Wars versus Star Trek or political or baseball thing, people want to argue that their side is better than the other side. And it's human nature. So I think that the rivalry probably isn't, I like both personally.
Yeah.
But and I don't hold one over the other. But I think some of that comes from wanting to be the best at something, and we tend to forget that there is no best when it comes to stuff like this. Everybody wins. Are you a Marvel or are you a DC fan? It doesn't really. Who cares? It's all great stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, what would you recommend to somebody who would want to, somebody who is an existing cosplayer who just goes to conventions and just like goes around in the same costume, or somebody who wants to go deeper into stuff? What kind of, where would they look to join groups, and what kind of, I'm not going to say exactly what kind of group, because some people are Marvel fans, some people are Star Wars fans, some people, but what would you recommend is a good way to get started with that?
Facebook is a phenomenal resource. I think for pretty much any character or fandom you can think of, there is a Facebook group dedicated to that fandom and making costumes for that fandom, or to making costumes for a specific character. Like there's a Padme Facebook group, there's a Rey Facebook group, a Jyn Erso, a Holdo group, a Leia group. There's multiple Leia groups. And Facebook, it's such a great place to find those resources. So what's really fun for me sometimes is I'll scroll through, and if someone's asking a question of like, oh, what's a pattern I could use for this costume? I love popping and saying, oh, I shared this pattern, you can use that. But sometimes someone will actually pop in and suggest my pattern, or they'll answer a question someone asked about one of my patterns. And it's really neat because it's kind of like things take on a life of their own. And it's like you share something. The thing is, once you start, when you are new and you start and you're learning and you're learning from other people, then you get to a point where you get to help other people and you get to answer questions. And it's kind of like when I first started, there were people who shared resources that I used, and then I've gotten to meet a couple of them. Or it's funny because it's like it's not necessarily people who are actually famous, but it's like they feel like they're famous, and you're like, I bet like people when they meet you at a table, they're like just meeting someone who's created something that's amazing. It's just like it's magical. And the thing within these costuming groups is everyone can be that person if they're sharing and helping people. So those Facebook groups are the place to start. I think thinking about what your goal is really important, because if someone's goal is for a formal costume group, or if their goal is they want to get involved with one of the charity costuming groups, you're going to have to think about that in your build, because if you're going to wear a superhero costume, like if you're wearing it to charity events, it's going to be more frequent than a couple times a year for a convention. So you've got to really think about, okay, is this going to be sturdy enough? Am I going to be able to wash it? Because sometimes for hospital events, you might need to think about sanitizing or something like that. But it's thinking about your goal, but also realizing you don't need to have a goal. You can just make a costume because it's fun. You don't have to I've only done 2 cosplay contests. I did a Star Wars one at Dragon Con and the Celebration one, but there's people who they love making costumes for contests, and that's great. You can also just make a costume to take pictures of yourself at home, or just make something. For me, I need to have something to do with my hands. So I like having, for me, it's very calming and soothing to work on a costume when things are going well. So I think figuring out your goal, figuring out if do you want to make it yourself, which is great, or do you want to commission someone, which is also great. You sometimes hear people who get judgy about people who don't make their own cosplays, and that's absolutely ridiculous, because for one, if the people who commission costumes are funding the work and the costumes of the people who do commissions, and also we're all playing dress up, we're having fun. So I think, and again, in those Facebook groups, if you're purchasing a costume, people can give you recommendations on who to buy from, where to go, where to look, or they can give you suggestions for whether something might be within your skill set. But I highly recommend learning how to figure this stuff out. Or if you meet people, you can also do trades. Like, I know a lot of people who, someone might do the hard costume parts for someone else and they trade it for the soft costume parts. Because if someone is good with armor and not with sewing, or sometimes photographers might trade for like photography skills for costumes, or it's a really kind of fun economy. And there are a lot of props, not all of them. There are a surprising number of props and accessories and things that actually hold their value pretty well. So if someone has like a dire financial situation, if they sell their armor, sometimes you can actually sell it for more than the raw materials. But it's always really heartbreaking when that happens, because, you know, somebody has to part with something that they put their blood, sweat, and tears into.
So, okay, so I have a couple more questions, because as you're talking, you know, a couple of things that popped in my head. I actually have a cousin who does a lot of cosplay stuff, but he did commission somebody to build like an alien costume for him. And so a couple of things. The first question, it's a 2-part question. The first question is, you're talking about accessories. You know, clearly you have created your own costumes. Have you ever purchased accessories while you've been at a convention? Or, okay, so talk about that a little bit.
So I'll basically look at something and decide if it's a pain and I don't want to deal with it. Sometimes I'll buy it. Sometimes it's more in my own costumes that I get really, no, I want to do it all myself. For my husband's Han Solo, his New Hope Han Solo, I bought his shirt, the vest and the pants he first started with. I think I ordered from one of the online companies, because he was taking either he was taking too long to decide what costumes he wanted for that first Dragon Con, or I was spending too much time on my own costumes. It was probably me spending time on my own costumes, but I bought those. And then when I wanted to go for Rebel Legion for him, I had to modify them a bit. I bought there's certain things where you really can't do it yourself unless you have really specific tools. So his Han Solo holster and belt rig, I bought that because I can't machine the belt buckles. And I did have to modify it because it was too long. Like his thigh is short. So I had to shorten it, and I had fortunately done a fair amount of leather work on lighter weight leather for the LARPing costumes. So I bought that. Before I got my 3D printer, I'd buy the 3D printed pieces, like for Kira, the Crimson Dawn dress, the Crimson Dawn symbol on the necklace and on the back. I bought that because I didn't have a way to make it myself. Holdo, I bought her tiara. Jin, so yeah, for Jen Urso, I bought her blaster and her Chanfa because I didn't have a 3D printer at the time. So I'll definitely buy files for 3D printing. The only I made from, I learned how to, because I like figuring things out. So I learned how to use Tinkercad. So I made the rank badge for Jedi Flashback Leia. So that, and I have to share that because I haven't got around to it. But typically, if something is either going to be really dangerous to work with, I'll like the materials, I might buy it. I'm trying to think of, I don't have a good example for that, but it kind of depends, but usually I try to do everything from scratch. I've been doing more leather and I've spent a ridiculous amount of money at Tandy Leather. So I've been doing most of my leather work now myself, but I don't even, did I answer the question?
Mhm.
I tried.
Yes, you did. So
Again, there's, and even if you do have the, even if you have everything and you could do something yourself, if you don't want to, support another maker. It's great. It's fine.
so have people approached you to do things for them?
Yeah. I used to do a lot more commissions. I've I funded a lot of my own costumes and a lot of my stuff doing commissions, but I kind of then reached the point. So for me, I like the novelty of figuring out how to make something. Once I figured out and I've made it, that's kind of the excitement is gone. So I don't necessarily really want to make it again. And I'm a teacher. The teaching is a lot. So I've kind of reached the point where I want my sewing time. I want the only pressure when I'm creating and making. I want the only pressure to come from myself, because even I have high standards, especially if I'm making something for someone else. I want it's got to be my absolute best. And even if they wouldn't notice my 80% effort versus my 95% effort, I still would know and I would still feel bad. So, and I also, a big thing is I need to feel that inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not gonna, if it's a costume I'm kind of meh about, I'm not gonna want to do it. It's kind of at this point, I have a couple people, we're waiting for other things to fall into place before we get started. But I have a couple people, I have like 2 people, I have things I'm gonna work on, but it's because they're basically family. And I want to make that costume for them. So that's a kind of a long way of saying, like, I have done commissions, and if the right circumstances apply, like if I mean, I think one of the costumes I finished a commission for someone because I realized to get the motivation to finish it, the friend was going to Galaxy's Edge, and I was like, all right, if you pick up the reforged Ray Saber for me, that's the motivation I need to finish this piece you want.
So, okay, so let me ask you this question. And the way you're describing some of this stuff, it's really, really interesting. And it's really interesting for someone like me because I'm an artist. I draw. I paint if I have to. I've built a couple of things, but through and through, I think that I'm a creative person and I do certain things a certain way. When I go to these conventions and I see a lot of the cosplayers, I'm impressed with what they're doing, but I think that for the most part, and it's not a judgment call on my part, but I'm kind of looking at it from somebody who's an artist alley. I think that there is a recognition of the work that goes in, but for the general feeling for all of it, it's like, well, these are fans, and that's all they are. It's like, oh, they're dressing up in costume and they're fans, and there's been push and pull over that over the course of the past few years. And just to interject real quick, my own personal opinion is I actually think that the cosplayers are part of the future of these conventions, whether it's a Star Wars convention or a comic book convention. And anybody who doesn't see that is missing what's right in front of them. But I'm going to ask you a question, and I want to see what you think. Do you consider yourself an artist?
Yeah. I think it's it's that because it's that interpretation. So when I am making screen accurate costumes, there's still that interpretation. There's still kind of figuring out how to make it work on my body, how to weigh the proportions. So I think I mean, when you think about things like the golden ratio, or just what kinds of colors work together using that color theory. I mean, you wouldn't think beige would clash with beige, but it does. So it's not, it's definitely, there's a little overlap. It's a different set of skills than graphic arts and drawing and painting. Like if I try to do a sketch of a costume before I make it, I have to really work hard to not have it look like a stick figure. But I think it's looking at the materials and figuring out how to do it, figuring out how to combine it all. And especially when you're thinking about cosplayers, you're not just, if you're making your costume yourself, you're not, or if you're not making it, you're still your own stylist, you're still your own makeup artist, you're still your hair. So many cosplayers set up their own photo shoots, so you've got that aspect. I mean, I think I'm more of a practical effects type artist, where like, I mean, I think in that, if you think about the people who make, like, sculpt and do the masks, like one of my friends does amazing silicone latex masks. He's just got some Mascanata ones that are just amazing. And I feel like, I guess in a way, it's in my mind, there's kind of like a spectrum of like the folks like you who do the visual arts, and you create it from your purely your imagination. Like, that's at a different level than what I do most of the time, which is reinterpret and figure out how to make it, but it's still being it's still being an artist, it's still being artistic. I definitely feel, it's like when I started delving into the photography stuff, I feel that in a different part of my creative soul than I feel the costuming part, if that makes sense. Like, it's different sides of, and not even the same coin, it's different sides of the same D20, if that makes sense.
I want to ask about your photography, but before I do, I am going to say something, because you had made a difference between the kind of stuff that I'm doing and the kind of stuff that you're doing, and I actually don't think there's that big of a difference. And one of the observations I made while we were talking was you spoke about doing commissions, and you kind of like, made that look with your mouth and kind of turned your nose up at the idea of, yeah, I can do this, I can just like churn it out, but that's not fun. And so creativity is creativity, whether you're doing makeup or whether you're doing costumes or whether you're drawing a comic book page or whether you're building a model or whether you're creating a silicone mask. Creativity is creativity. And so I wouldn't be so quick to separate that. And, and as a matter of just to solidify that a little bit more, you mentioned that you're doing photography.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
So I think that the whole camera photography thing definitely got kicked into overdrive because of the costuming and the cosplay. That first Dragon Con, one of the coolest experiences was was a photographer at one of the Leia shoots was like, oh, can I get your picture? And just that first time, somebody with a big camera, like, because you don't know the difference between someone with just a random camera who doesn't know what to do and someone like with a real professional. You just are like, that is a camera with a detachable lens, you must know what you're doing. Like, asked to get my picture, and I saw those pictures, and those ceremonial Leia pictures are still some of my favorite of that costume. They are my favorite of that costume to this day. That was he made me feel like a movie star, and just seeing everything come together, the hair, the makeup, the costume, the posture, especially if you're really trying to emulate that character. that photograph gives you a chance to see it all come together in a way that you don't get to see because it's on you. You don't get that. So that was so magical. And then as I was walking around, and whenever you get to see, when you do the photography meetups and you get pictures with other people in the same costume, it just every time someone took my picture and I got to see my picture, it was just so exciting. And then so that kind of started that, and I started to meet a lot of photographers who have been just like, I'm really starting my photography journey, but all those photographers I've met through, most of the photographers I know I've met through the cosplay and the costuming in Star Wars. They all have been so amazing with like mentoring me and giving me suggestions and helping me spend my money. But then as I started churning out costumes, I lost track. I don't know. I have like, I don't know, somewhere between 17 and 20 approved between myself and my husband's like Star Wars costumes. I was kind of like, well, it's tough to see the details when you're getting submissions. Like camera phones are pretty good, but a DSLR gets better, more details. It's easier for the judges to see those pictures. So I think not last Christmas, but the Christmas before, my husband got me a Canon, a Rebel T6, which is like the most basic DSLR. And I could, there's an app I could control on my phone. So I could put it on a tripod and get my submission pictures for costumes. I didn't have to wait for my husband. And then of course I have a dog, and he hasn't been barking, which is great. I think my husband gave him a treat to distract him, but he's a mutt. He's mostly looks like a lab, and he's really dark brown, black. And it's really hard to get really good pictures of dogs on camera phones. Taking pictures of him, and just, I love how you can do things with light in photos. And I love how, like, I can capture just how adorable his little furry face is. So over the summer, I was playing more and more with my Rebel, and I was starting to kind of feel like I was coming up against the limitations of that camera, because it's a solid camera, but it's got limitations. So then I started talking with one of my photographer friends. He said, oh, I've got this old camera body. He's like, that we're not using if you want to buy it. And that's what's sitting, oh, no, that's what's sitting behind me now. And we've got this little baby bunny that was living under our porch. So taking pictures of that, and getting pictures. I mean, not that there's not that many subjects to take pictures of right now, but one of our friends is weathering COVID with us and living with us. And there's a window in my house that I call it the magic window now, because I just had him stand next to that window. And this was even before I got the updated camera, but just the light coming through that window on his skin, it just looks amazing. And he, I mean, this is a tough time for everyone. And he saw the picture and he's like, that's me? I'm like, yeah, you look amazing. And just learning how a photographer who knows what they're doing can make you look amazing. Whereas, I mean, how many times do you take a selfie and you're like, oh, I look horrible? Well, it's not because anyone looks horrible. It's because of all the different technical aspects of photography that camera phones don't work. So I started enjoying that photography element. I started really enjoying having that. And just during the COVID-19, during all the shutdowns, I haven't been that motivated to make costumes. And I was kind of feeling bad because early on when things started shutting down, I definitely panic bought a whole bunch of supplies to make sure I could finish all the costumes I had started. And it wasn't that insane of an idea, because I mean, 3D, for a while you couldn't get PLA for 3D printing, and a lot of the fabric stores you couldn't get anything. But then I did that and I just didn't have that motivation. But I felt that motivation to take pictures. So I've been taking more, there's so many online classes you can take for photography and just practicing. And I'm really, really excited for when conventions resume, not just because I want to dress up and see my friends, but I really want to go and get pictures of those other cosplayers so they can have a picture and be like, wow, I look so awesome in here, and share that with people. And just, And also I love costumes and details. So if you're taking someone's picture, I mean, I have the giant 70 to 200, oops, I keep wrong corner, the giant 70 to 200 millimeter lens. So I can zoom in, which is great. And again, it's a different area of creativity. And that's where I've been feeling motivated and inspired right now. Did I answer your question? I keep.
Yeah, you did. You did great. I'm going to wrap it up here because I think this has gone on for like an hour and a half. So if anyone gets bored, they can go off and do what they want to do. But do you want to tell us where people can find you?
Sure. So for any of my main hub for where I host all my sewing patterns is jeneyre.com, JENEYRE.com. For my cosplay stuff, my Instagram is my most active platform at Jen Eyre Cosplay, JENEYRE Cosplay. My photography, I split off into a separate account. So that's Jen Eyre Photography. And if you like baby rabbits and my puppy dog, I mean, he's 11 years old, but he's still a puppy. That's where those are. Also Jen Eyre Cosplay on Facebook, but pretty much I post onto Instagram and it automatically posts on my other platforms. But again, if people are interested in learning how to make costumes, learning how to use different patterns, I love when someone messages me and say, hey, I'm using your Leia pattern. What's this piece? And then I realize, oh, I should have labeled that better. Or even better, if somebody makes a costume using one of my patterns and tags me on it, I love seeing that picture. It's like the highlight of my life. So if people are watching and they decide to start using one of my tutorials or one of my patterns, they're all free. I think the only one that's not free is the Jedi Flashback Leia jacket. I'm just asking people to make a donation of any amount to a cause supporting Black Lives Matter, specifically like the ACLU or other ones, but everything is free. And just don't be, if someone, wants to get started, just don't be afraid to ask questions. And there's a lot of people, I'm definitely not the only one out there sharing patterns and answering questions for people who want to get involved in this.
Great. Well, we're going to wrap it up there, and thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
I'm going to put these links in the description on the video, and it's live streaming right now, but I will send you everything after. We'll talk about that in a second. So anyway, thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Take care.